Hey everybody, I'm Jacob Castro and welcome to another video here on Jacob's Aquarium. Another plant guide, I should actually say, not regular video, but plant guide. Hope you guys are doing good. Hope your tanks are doing good. Today this plant guide is for Amazon sword. A lot of people like this plant. It's not really a fast growing plant, but you know, when it does grow out and get big, it looks beautiful. So that's the plant we're going to be talking about today. And as always, we're going to be talking about how to propagate this plant, the color that you can expect with this plant. I always forget these things, how to grow it, what it needs to grow. I'm going to tell you how to grow this plant, put it that way. Okay. All right. So let's get started. So let's talk about color first. Amazon swords typically are a light to dark green colored plant. I would say though that traditionally they are more of a light green colored plant. Very rarely do I see Amazon swords very dark in color, and typically when I do see them dark in color, they're in a tank with really low light. You know, contrary to popular belief, you know, when you have plants under really high lighting, some plants typically don't turn darker, some plants turn actually brighter. And with Amazon swords, it seems like that's the case. So if you have these plants or this plant under low to medium light, I would say you can expect more of a darker color. But if you have it under high light, like under these awesome Castro LEDs, like the ones that I have, you can expect probably more of a light green color, which in my opinion is the most beautiful color that this plant can offer. I really like light green colors in plants. I feel it really makes a tank pop. It just looks so bright and it's just beautiful, you know. So that's the color you can expect with Amazon swords. Now let's talk about how to propagate Amazon swords. First and foremost, I should actually say that there are lots of different sword plants out there. I personally offer, I believe, 5 different species of sword plants on my website, but since we're focusing on Amazon swords in this video, I'm gonna talk about how to propagate this plant. But generally, you could pretty much follow the same guidelines with other sword plants as far as, you know, how to propagate them as well. So with Amazon swords, they produce these long stems that grow out from the middle of this plant, kind of like a the plant is kind of like a rose, you know, and the little stem that grows out of the middle that I guess you can call a runner. Well, actually, no, it's not a runner because it doesn't grow along the substrate. It does in fact grow vertical, I guess. Okay, so we'll just say that it's a vertical growing stem. So think of the plant as a flower. A vertical growing stem grows out of the middle, and then eventually once it gets to a certain height, I would say about 4 to 5 inches, it'll produce a plant, and then it'll grow again and it'll produce a plant. And you know what, I should probably say that this plant is probably a runner. It's just in my case, what they do in my tanks all the time is they propagate by growing vertically as far as those stems that I was talking about. But they could be runners as well. I'm not 100% on that. But that's how they grow in my tank. So, but that's how they propagate themselves. So there's really nothing special you have to do to propagate this plant. You just got to let it grow, let it mature, let it get to its adult size. Or maybe not. I've had some Amazon swords that are pretty tiny and they produce those little stems and propagate themselves. So I'm pretty sure that this plant will propagate at any stage in its life, you know, whether it's a young plant, a medium to old plant, whatever you want to call it. If it's a grandpa plant, you know, yeah, it'll produce a stem and it'll propagate itself. You can leave that stem alone. You can let it grow along your substrate if that's what this plant does. Like I said, I'm not 100% sure on that. You can let it grow vertical, whatever. But typically what most people do is they will cut the stem off once it gets to a certain height or has a certain amount of plants growing off of that stem. And they will then plant those little tiny little baby plants in their substrate. And I think that's the best way to go, because if you let these plants, or if you let the plants that have grown on that stem, the propagating stem or whatever you want to call it, if you let that, you know, free float in the water attached to the plant, I really don't believe they'll grow that fast because they're not in substrate, they're not getting any nutrients from their roots. So it's pretty much best to just cut those off and plant them down into your substrate. So that's pretty much how to propagate this plant. Now let's talk about how to properly grow this plant. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, this plant can tolerate low light to high light. I would say though, use caution when growing this plant under high light, because I have seen some Amazon swords develop leaf burn under really high light. So I would say if you're going to be using high light on your tank, probably it's best to grow Amazon swords in a really tall tank. That way there's plenty of separation between your light fixture and your Amazon swords. Now, if you're growing this in a really shallow tank, then you might run into a problem with leaf burn if you're growing Amazon swords really close to high light. So optimally, look at me trying to use big words. I can't do that. So typically, we'll just say that it's best to grow Amazon swords under low to medium light. They, like I said, they will develop more of a darker color, but it's best not to risk growing them under really high light and burning their leaves, because then the plant's just going to look really attractive. It's going to develop little brown spots, and it's going to make your tank look gross. Or maybe not. Maybe you like that natural dead plant look. I don't know. Whatever floats your boat. So pretty much low to medium light is good. It can tolerate high light, but I would say keep the light pretty far away from the Amazon swords if you're planning to do that. Now, as far as fertilization, pretty much Amazon swords, just like any plant, can benefit from CO2 injection. So if you are using CO2 on your planted tank, great, awesome. That is a really, really good thing to do, because that is just a little insurance, for your planted tank that gives your plants a little extra kick, something natural that they consume in the wild. So if you're using CO2, very, very good. But this plant also likes really good substrate. As I said, it roots very heavily, so it likes to really uptake a lot of nutrients through its roots. So really good substrate is beneficial to this plant. ADA soil, Eco-Complete, fluorite. There's even one, there's a new substrate on the market. It's some type of volcanic substrate. I'm still doing a little research about that. I'm going to be talking about that substrate in a future video, by the way. I'm not sure all the details about it, but I'm sure that substrate would be beneficial as well. Pretty much any substrate that is really high in nutrients. If you're buying a substrate that's not high in nutrients, try using some root tabs, placing them around the base of the Amazon swords. They love nutrients, and they grow best, and they grow fast, and well, they're not really fast growers, but they grow best with plenty of nutrients in the substrate. As far as liquid nutrients, I would recommend that as well, but you know what? It's not entirely necessary if you have good substrate and CO2. If you don't have CO2 but you have good substrate, then I would recommend that you use liquid nutrients. So either one, it just depends on your system, but this plant does love nutrients. It's not a plant that can grow in just plain gravel. I mean, you could try and dose a lot of CO2 and liquid nutrients, but it's best to grow this plant in good substrate with plenty of nutrients in the substrate, because it does like to uptake a lot through its heavy root system. And lastly, I thought I would just let you guys know where this plant grows best in a planted tank, and what type of planted tank this plant is good for. So as I said in the beginning of the video, Amazon swords do get quite large, so they are best for a larger scale tank. And what I mean by larger scale is a planted tank with really large plants with really big leaves. It's not a plant that pairs well with, like, for example, Rotala indica, with those really tiny leaves, tiny stems. It's not a plant that will look really good. It doesn't match the scale. If you're familiar with model railroading or RC cars or whatever, you know what scale means. You know what I'm talking about. But for those of you that aren't, that's a little bit, I hope I explained it that well. So it's a plant best for larger scale tanks, and typically best to be planted in the background, because once it does get really big, if it's not planted in the background of your tank, if it's planted in the middle or the foreground, it's going to look really awkward. It's going to hide your tank, so you're not going to be able to appreciate, your fish or your other plants that are behind that. So plant this plant in the background of your planted tank, because that's where it grows best, and that's where it looks the best in a planted tank. Okay, all right, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I love you guys so much. Don't forget to check out my my Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Of course, if you're watching this video somewhere else, check out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/JacobsAquarium. And also, don't forget, if you're in the market for aquarium plants, don't forget to check out jacobsaquarium.com. It is my website. I manage everything. If you ever have a problem with your order, or you need some customer service, you can talk directly to me. So it's jacobsaquarium.com. You can find a bunch of plants on there, all reasonably priced, and we do restock pretty much every week, so we always have stuff in stock. And we also send out a newsletter for those of you that want a plant that's not in stock, so you can find out when it is in stock when you get the newsletter. So you can sign up for the newsletter by going to jacobsaquarium.com/newsletter. Thanks again for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. Stay tuned for more videos. There's so much more to come here on Jacobs Aquarium, here on YouTube. I love you guys. Have fun with your tanks, and I'll see you next time.